Hi everyone, I hope you're all going well. Just as I promised, I said I'd make a really short video about Assessment 1.5 just to give you a little bit of an overview about the expectations for the assessment around Jessie. We've been really busy marking Assessment 1.4, so we'll get that back to you in the next week or so, which is good. Just while I've got you here, just a quick update about the Dylan assessment. Many of you have emailed me about your marks for that assessment, saying that you were disappointed, that you'd put a lot of work into it, and that was evident, and that's great. A lot of you didn't write goals that were SMART goals, so I think for this assessment you need to build on that knowledge around being able to write a SMART goal. So if you've got some feedback that your goals weren't SMART or that your risk factors were identified didn't quite make sense, then you need to go back and review the work in that module around writing SMART goals, because this is a skill that is also part of this assessment. So many of you wrote things that were very complex, way too complicated, that you broke it down. You know, one part of it was SMART, one part of it was specific, one part was measurable, one part was realistic. So that's not what we were after. We need a really succinct, short, 1 or 2 line goal that Jessie can achieve as part of the scenario moving forward. So it'd be good to go back and make sure that you've got a good understanding of a SMART goal being specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and have a time frame. The main point of making really good SMART goals is that you need to be able to evaluate your success against them. So, for example, if you say something like losing weight, so somebody needs to lose weight, you've got to think, well, how would I measure that? To be specific, the goal would need to say something along the lines of, you know, to lose 0.5 of a kilo per week over the next 4 weeks. That's really measurable. So we can say either we achieved that or we didn't. Okay, so, you know, that's just a piece of advice for those of you who didn't do as well as you thought you were going to do with the SMART goals for Dylan in 1.4. Go back and just review that and make sure you've got your head around what makes a good SMART goal. Keep it simple, and moving into Assessment 1.5, you know, keep that in the back of your mind when you're writing the goals for Jessie. Okay, so what you need to do for Assessment 1.5 is basically read the scenario, listen to the video about Jessie, have a look at the notes that accompany that, make sure you've got a good outline of the assessment in your head. I've also put up a template that you might like to use. It's not compulsory, but if it was me, I would certainly be using the template that's been supplied. It is broken down into the 5 sections which align with the questions that have been asked of you as part of the assessment. So I would begin by just looking at the questions that are in the assessment outline. So the first one says, what problems, issues or challenges do you think might be applicable to Jessie? So you need to have 10 of these in total. So as an example, one of the things that is there is about independence. So independence is really important for Jessie, and you might think, well, how can Jessie be better supported to become more independent than what she is now? And then you have to think about, well, that's going to be the issue. Then I've got to think about what sorts of questions I might ask in order to gain an understanding of whether independence is applicable and what she'd like to get out of it. So an example might be, you could say something along the lines of, Jessie, you know, you seem to be very independent. Can you tell me about any areas where you'd like to be more independent? And so that would be in the section around the questions that you'd ask, and you can fill that in. You don't need to have hundreds of questions in each section. A couple will suffice. So one of the key things around this subject is that it is chronic condition self-management. So you need to think about, we're hoping to support people to self-manage. So thinking in the back of your mind about that patient-centred language. I mean, obviously, if we were doing this in real life, we'd be working with Jessie. We wouldn't be setting the goals for Jessie without her input. So you can just keep that in the back of your mind as you're working through. Okay, so the first part was the identified issue or the challenge. The second part was the question. What questions would you ask? And the third part, for each problem or challenge, develop a goal that might be applicable to Jessie. So it might be something as simple as, by the end of this session, develop a list with Jessie of areas where she'd like to gain greater independence and work with her to prioritise those. So thinking, how are we going to know that we've achieved that? At the end of this session, Jessie's going to have a list of goals and she's going to have prioritise them. So again, keep it simple, and remember that realistic part of the SMART criteria. Okay, so then moving on to the fourth part, for each of the goals, you need to identify what self-management tools, interventions or strategies might be used to support Jessie to self-manage. And if we take our example of independence, you might want to think about something like motivational interviewing. And that was something that was introduced back in the module around Dylan. So you could say that motivational interviewing has been used before successfully with people like Jessie, and you would reference that. So unlike assessment 1.4, we require references for this assessment for Jessie. So for every self-management intervention that you come up with, you will need to have some references to support those. So not only do we want to know what you might do as far as self-management interventions go, so motivational interviewing, for example, then in the fifth section, or that last part of the template, you would then say what member of the multidisciplinary team would be most appropriate to support Jessie, and what would their role be. So not just who they are, you don't just write psychologist or speech pathologist in that last box, you need to say what role will they play. And again, you would reference that. So for example, if we talk about motivational interviewing as something that we would work with using with Jessie to increase their independence, you might then say in the final section that this would be a good role for a person with a portfolio of health coaching, for example. And you would then say what exactly would that person do and provide a reference. So it is quite simple. It is worth 15 marks this time, so a little bit more effort's required. It needs to be well written, it needs to have references to support that. You need to have your 10 goals. And the thing to note is that 2 of those goals must relate to the NDIS. So in the module for week 8, there was lots of material about the NDIS. And you have to understand that the NDIS is underpinned by a principle of making sure that people with disabilities are at the centre of the decision making and the planning. So that would need to be evident in the way that you approach this task. Person-centred language, as I said before, and that sort of thing. So plenty of information about the NDIS there in the module, but again, you can look on the website, you can Google NDIS, you can look at the Department of Health, any of that sort of thing. Okay, so it needs to be, simple, and it needs to be clear, exactly what it is that you're doing. Okay, so I haven't really got anything else to add, so I hope you're all doing really well. We've passed the time of the midpoint of the semester. We're up to week 8 as far as the modules go. You're about to have a break. It's nearly grand final day. It's grand final week, so if you're in Melbourne, it's kind of a crazy but kind of exciting place to be. So for those of you that cheer for, barrack for either the Magpies or the Eagles, best of luck to your teams on Saturday. And for those that aren't interested in the footy, it's a pretty tough time to be living in Victoria. I personally love the footy. Anyway, hope you're all doing well. Talk to you soon. And remember that if you have any questions, use the discussion boards. There's been some issues with those over the last couple of weeks, but I believe the discussion board for assessment 1.5 is working well. So use that if you want to. If not, just drop me an email and I'll reply. Okay, talk to you again soon. Bye now.